Did you hear what Jay-Z got into?
I heard he got $50K stolen out of his bank account by AI. That's what I heard.
That's the least of his problems.
Welcome to the show, where AI takes the floor. Leah Rich on the mic.
Welcome to the AI Guys podcast, where we make artificial intelligence easy to understand for everyone. I'm your host, Lee Dixon, and as always, I'm joined by SRQ's best-dressed man, Rich Swire.
Thank you for taking notice. Not many people realize.
Sometimes it's about the simplicities.
As the kids say, my fit is on fleek.
I'm not sure the kids say that. If they do, that means they're super behind in the times as well. But we're not here. We're not here to talk about each other's drip at this point. What we're going to be doing today is diving into how to prepare your business for the agentic workforce. So a lot of these, new buzzwords are really starting to fly as the year's coming to a close, and agentic workforce is something we've been discussing really since the podcast started. So I thought it'd be nice to kind of do a mini ep today to kind of give companies and different business owners this concept in simple terms, and then maybe talk about how to really assess the readiness of your business when AI agents come into the fray.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we've talked about this in past episode of what exactly is an agent. So for those who haven't really been caught up on our past episodes, essentially the way we kind of talk about AI agents is exactly how you would think. Something that when you take AI and actually give it a purpose, an action, and it has agency, it has the ability to actually execute that action, either on its own or with the assistance or with the approval of a human, right? Human in the loop. So unlike most AI that we've experienced today, most people have only experienced it in the context of a tool like ChatGPT. AI agents operate very much like employees. So when we talk about an agentic workforce, what we're really talking about is the movement from businesses looking at, or even organizations looking at any sort of action that might occur within the four walls of their office, whether it be communicating to customers or communicating to employees or vendors, that workload would be offloaded to one or more or many agents that would actually be able to either automate a large portion of that task or at a minimum augment what the current employee is able to do.
Yeah.
And obviously for the last 30, 40 years, we've seen this massive uptick in capacity and delivering more product, more services to the economy via software. But what makes this, I think, uniquely different is that agents themselves have a lot more capacity and capability with the recent developments of LLMs, but more importantly, as you give them access and allow them to take action within your own organization, give them some direction through your business processes, they actually can operate just much like an employee. So you're already seeing this happen across many workplaces I would say in a more minimum, more conservative, but I would expect over the next 3, 5, 10 years that there will be more agents working in a company than humans. Not to say that there's going to be a reduction in number of humans working in a company. It's just that in order to scale and in order to deliver more product, more service, or more value, that every company is going to bring on more and more agents to fulfill that promise.
Yeah, and I think something that you brought up there I really want to make sure we focus on is this agentic workforce isn't necessarily about just dropping bots into a process that you have. It's really creating an autonomy that the agent knows where to work within that boundary. Because I do think, there was just the recent news about Microsoft and having their Copilot where it was, grabbing data that it wasn't supposed to and just kind of relaying it. So creating these levels, not just of security, but just of like, hey, your task and your role only really needs to access this to do it. And it's like, great. And putting those guide rails in place, because the autonomy isn't just so it goes wild or does what it needs to do to accomplish a task. It really is more about collaborating with that human team to understand like what task it's trying to perform or what problem it's trying to solve to drive the efficiency versus being just, another piece of software you're plugging in.
Yeah, I think there's a huge what I would call kind of false narrative that's growing on, social media or news channels, mostly because of ignorance on how AI is architected. But And I've seen a few people post things like, oh, you know, this AI, I was able to trick it to transfer money, or I was
Yeah.
able to trick it to allow me access to this.
That's
And the reality
rampant
is,
on LinkedIn and stuff right now.
yeah,
I feel like I see 10 of
yeah,
those articles a day of just
yeah,
like, this person got scammed
yeah.
50K. It's just like, come on.
So I think it's important to understand what AI is able to do. And also, I think it's better to frame what AI is going to, how AI is going to be utilized in the future, and what kind of constraints and what kind of inside of the business, what capability it's truly going to have. So I do think that there's a big difference between software and AI. I always tend to say AI is as powerful as you want it to be. So I use the same example. We've used it. You used it many times with customers, is think of it as an employee. So when you deploy an AI agent, sure, you're going to give it access to a foundational model like OpenAI, like Gemini, like any one of the others, Llama. Now, understand that a foundational model is nothing more than a massive database that has been optimized for you to prompt that database or that LLM, that large language model, and for it to give you a response.
Mm-hmm.
Outside of that, it cannot do anything. It's read only. You can't influence it beyond the scope of your thread, and you certainly it can't access your email or access your bank account or all these other kind of hypothetical things, unless, of course, you give it access
You
to
give
do
it the
that.
permissions. Yeah,
And there's not really even, honestly, there's no technology out there that's readily available on your phone to even do that yet, but it will be, right? Like Apple's and the Googles of the world will start to allow your AI to access certain information. But I would think of it in the sense of just like, if you were to hire a personal assistant or if you were to hire an employee, what are the three things that you do when you hire somebody, right? The first thing you do is you train them, right? You tell them, hey, this is how I operate, this is our business, and that training gets compiled with their foundational model, call that their college degree or whatever you might call it. Then the next thing you do is you say, hey, you need access to these applications in order to do your job, right? So here's your login to your email, here's your login to the CRM, and AI is not going to be any different than that. In fact, I think that's the way you approach it when you're building an agentic workforce. That's literally what it is. It's a workforce. So if you give an AI agent access to your bank account directly, and it is able to process transactions, which would take a lot of programming in order to make that happen. It couldn't do that just by itself with an LLM. Right. Then certainly, yes, it can do those things. But that's like saying, you're literally giving them the keys to the castle and wondering how they got through the front door. It's not some sort of black ops thing where the LLM tricks somebody into figuring it out. Now, having said all that, obviously, one of the things that we talk about when building a agentic workforce is think of it as if an AI agent is truly living and working outside of your firewall. I always take that approach. I think there's a somewhat native flaw in building AI inside of the firewall and saying, oh, because it's inside of the firewall, it is secure, it's safe, and so forth. And I think that's an absolute wrong way of thinking about how AI operates, because AI, if you give it access to systems within the firewall and it doesn't have to be authorized, it could potentially, obviously, not because it wants to, but it could access things and bring it into its LLM and be trained on it, and you wouldn't know it. One of the kind of challenges of AI is it does operate like a black box. So let's just say you were training it on your email, and for whatever reason, you just slip of the finger or whatever, when you're setting it up, you said, oh, you can, you give it the permissions to access everybody's email. And so it doesn't do it because it's got some mind of its own that it wants to sneak in and read everybody's email. It just happens to be, it says, okay, train on my email. And it goes out and trains on everybody's email and brings it all back into the LLM. And you wouldn't know it did that. And then if somebody comes along and says, oh, hey, and they start seeing emails, or pieces of text from emails and so forth, that's obviously possible to do. And I think there's a certain amount of risk when you bring it, if you don't operate as AI. Assume AI is outside of the firewall, and make sure that when you authorize access, you treat it like kind of a foreign or like a vendor or something like that, at least in the beginning, because I do think it's better to do it, be safe than allowing it to train on data that you don't 100%. Want it to train on.
Yeah, and I think that's something we should move into, is really kind of talking about how to assess that readiness for AI agents, because I do think a lot of businesses are starting to figure out where they want to deploy it. But if you don't know how that workflow needs to take place, if there's no identification of what those repetitive tasks or pinpointing the areas where an AI agent can fit in, then you either risk two things: one, exposing too much, or two, displacing employees or making that handoff maybe a little more clunky. So it's not benefiting anybody. It's actually, you're kind of having to pause to go back and revert and redo it the right way. So if you were to pretend like we know nothing about AI, but we do know a lot, if you're listening right now, obviously, but if you're going to go back and think about giving maybe 2 to 3 things that a business should look at to prepare themselves for an AI agent, what would be the lowest hanging fruit there?
Yeah, so I think the best way to go about it is, I always like to look at low hanging fruit as a definition of what's going to allow you to experience the full kind of arc of deploying your first AI agent, knowing full well you're going to deploy many, many agents in the future. That's not an if, that's just a when. But pick a low-hanging fruit, one that has the minimal amount of risk. So we talked about security being an unknown risk. Cost is always an unknown risk. Use, like effectiveness and whether your employees benefit from it, is another unknown risk. So you choose something that is obviously uses public information or information that's not proprietary, that's going to have a very low amount of cost to get it up and running. It doesn't require months or years or whatever of development. And then third, most importantly, make sure that it is something that either your team needs and they're unable to do it because either there's no budget or they don't have the capacity, or quite honestly, it's a thing that you've told people to do and they just don't do it, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, well, they're, and they're, yeah, I mean, I would say that in every business, there's 20-30% of tasks that are, I would consider mid to high critical that need to be done, but people just kind of go, oh, I got to do that again. And so the three use
not done with consistency.
Right. the three. So there's many different types of use cases that we've outlined in our platform, and they very much mirror kind of what you do within a company. But the top 3 that we've seen as that usually qualify as the low hanging fruits would be the SDR AI agent. So sales development, really helping your sales team perform and spend more time closing qualified deals instead of out there, kind of shotgunning or, spamming or blasting out messages randomly. AI can do a much better job of scaling your top of the funnel sales effort. Yeah. The second use case would be a CSR. And that's a no-brainer because nobody likes taking the I forgot my password support ticket. Mm-hmm. And so that first tier support can be executed at scale 24/7. And honestly, a lot of companies have outsourced that, because they don't, their right. current
They've already
team.
given the keys away.
Yeah. And it's probably not done very well. And they're probably overpaying for having somebody available for 24/7 because now you're dealing with time zones, you're dealing with overseas, et cetera. So having AI replace that CSR role, at least in the first tier, and then qualifying the support ticket, maybe even answering most of those low-hanging fruit support tickets, and then obviously upgrading or escalating it to their to the support team is a huge uptick in ROI. And then the third one, which I typically just refer to it as SEO, because I do, even though it is a little bit more than that, but really what we're talking about is marketing, and marketing is just a very vague term because it means a lot of things to a lot of people. But I mean, specifically SEO, but I would like to add to that is more, not just the search engine optimization as far as content creation. And this is a great example of like generating blogs, generating videos that gets you more of your content, more of your keywords out there so they can drive more organic traffic. But it's also making sure that you can align that with a very clear plan on being found on search engines by taking your keyword strategy, using AI to write to that, as well as using AI to go out and read and learn about that, what's happening in your keyword cloud so that it can drive more organic traffic. I mean, almost every business that I've talked to says 3 things, and they align perfectly with these 3 use cases. I have tons of leads that I'm not following up with, but I'm sure that if I did, I could convert more sales.
Yeah.
I have a ton of tickets that come in either after hours that are waiting more than 24 hours to get responses, or they're just wasting the time of my support team and they just don't have the capacity to follow up with, which creates angst amongst my customers and or prospects. And third is I'm paying way too much for clicks and I need to invest in organic traffic. Otherwise, this is never going to end, right? It used to be $3 a click. Now it's $5 a click and it's going to $10 a click. And at some point, the Googles and Facebooks, which are monopolies when it comes to PPC and SEM, are absolutely going to price you out of the market, right? And also, I think just organic search in general, even though people might think, oh, I'm nailing it with my Google or I'm nailing it with this and that, what they're probably not realizing is we're about to enter in a new phase of what I would call SEO, which is around AI. And we don't have to talk about on this episode, but probably something we should talk about in the future is OpenAI, Anthropic, Gemini has already started doing this because they're in Google search, but OpenAI will start pulling back results in context of search within their system. And you're going to want to be optimized to show up as an option within AI. And it's a completely different game than your classic SEO when it comes to Google. So most people, when they have SEO, they focus on Google. So those are really the three roles that we've seen. And all three meet those criteria, right?
Yeah.
Very low risk. Once you train up your AI to do sales outreach, it can answer basic questions about your product. It can be trained on your website and eventually can be really one of your better ISAs or SDRs. Same thing goes with support. It can be trained up on your knowledge base. It could be if you use Intercom or if you use any other support tool, it can be trained up on your tickets. Again, very low risk. Anything that goes outside of its ability to answer, it could be escalated again to a human in the loop. And then finally, the SEO one is even the least risky of all three, which is there's no real risk there at all. You're not even communicating.
If you're listening, we know you're not blogging right now.
Yeah, exactly.
Just be honest with yourself. It's okay. Yeah. I know you told yourself for the last 3 months you were going to get to blogging. You just haven't. And don't be afraid to, again, you'd hire somebody today, if you could, probably, to do it. So just train an AI that can at least be putting out something with consistency and relevancy to whatever your product or service is. And I bet you within a 90-day turnaround, you'll see some pretty significant changes just in having those metrics get bumped up just because of the consistency.
All three of those, no matter what business you're in, are a guarantee ROI, guaranteed, because they're a tenth. Each one of those costs a tenth of what an employee would cost to do that work. And again, the capacity and its ability to do it. For example, support 24/7. No employee is going to work 24/7. Sales outreach, texting or emailing.
You get burnt out on the nose.
1,000 people a day. No employee is going to do that. And then nobody wants to. And then SEO, generating 10, 20 really well thought out, optimized blogs a day. No human can do that. So there's an element to this that this is where AI really, really shines.
Yeah.
And I think for any business who wants to make sure that they can increase sales, improve support, lower cost, per acquisition of customer, lower your churn, retain better customers by providing better support, and growing your organic traffic to your website to get more leads for your sales reps. Those are your three go-to.
Absolutely, man. And, with all of that in mind too, and we'll kind of leave it on this last note, all of this is a human to agent collaboration. I think a lot of the negative spin that gets put on AI a lot of times is just where AI is going to replace people. And, instead of creating this transparency about how employees are going to work alongside AI to, maybe not as eloquently put as I'm about to, but like not have to do the shitty jobs or the shitty parts of their role, right? Where you don't want to have to deal with all those emails that just kind of pile up. And at one point you just go, I have to time block 4 hours to go back through and get through all this disgusting stuff I want to do. Like that's something AI can take on right now. Even in these very early stages of AI agents, it's not something that is so far in the future that you have to say, let's just table it. Like you can deploy those things relatively quickly and they're extremely effective. So,
and then just to summarize that too, just to completely change the perspective of what most people think of those AI agents as your personal assistant. So if you're a sales rep and you want more leads to be qualified, and you want to fill up your calendar to close more deals to get better commission, it's like hiring a sales assistant to go out and do the grunt work while you can close, right? Everybody wants that. There's no sales rep in the world that doesn't want that. Same thing with support.
Exactly.
If you're a top tier CSR and you want all those low hanging tickets to be answered and provide that live, and don't want to sit there on live chat all day and hear that annoying blook, 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 then let the AI do that. I mean, it's simple. And then when something does get escalated, you're there. So it's like having the best assistant. And then of course, the marketing team obviously wants to drive more traffic. Their KPIs are going to be aligned with organic growth, and their bonuses or their salaries or whatever are dependent on that. And it's a superpower for the employee, as more so than it is a tool or a technology for the business executive or owner. And employees, in my opinion, should be pushing for this. They should, if you are a sales support or a marketing person at a company, you should be going to your executive and saying, hey, I've got a new plan for 2025. We should be thinking about this. And if we do this, this, and this, we could deliver X times what we did this last year. And of course, we're on standby to help you do that.
Absolutely. Well, for everyone listening, thanks again for joining us on this episode. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button to stay in touch. Also, check out our Substack for more content, which will be linked to this episode to continue this discussion. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and we'll see you on the next episode. Take care, everyone.
Welcome to the show where air takes the floor.